Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Jason Belland, Executive in Residence with Attain Partners, and I'm absolutely delighted today to be talking all things education and all things Salesforce Education Report with my good friend, Navneet Johal, Director of Go-to-Market and Product Marketing for Education at Salesforce. We've known each other for, I don't know, like 1,000 years or something.
It feels like that at
Uh,
this point, Jason. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so awesome to talk to you and to connect with you. I'm very, very excited about the obviously I have a lot of experience with the Connected Education Report. So excited about what you've done with it, how you've evolved it over time. I'm eager to dig in, but some folks don't know you as well as I do. So maybe just a quick intro of who you are and what you're doing at Salesforce before we dive in.
Yeah, that's great, Jason. Thank you. Yeah, so as Jason said, I'm part of our go-to-market and product marketing team for education here at Salesforce. Fun fact, I was hired by Mr. Jason Belland many years ago in the industry solutions team for education. And so I'm still around at Salesforce, but I actually started my career in the classroom, in the further education sector in education in the UK. And so I think that's where a lot of my passion came for education. And then found my way into ed tech, and so it's nice to still kind of be doing that, and also working on this report as well. So it's good to talk about it as well, Jason.
Yeah, so let's dig into the report a little bit. I'd love to maybe just kind of ground us on some of the mechanics of the report, how many institutions were surveyed, geographies, students, et cetera. And then, you've been doing this for a while now. You've got a lot of data that's come in over the years through these reports. I'd love to, once we ground on who was surveyed so we understand what we're looking at, I would just love to hear from your perspective, were there things that were surprising or unexpected this year from as you've seen over the past few years?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, first and foremost, we conducted this or produced this report alongside a really good, a really fantastic research partner, and there was a quantitative and qualitative component to the report. And so, on the quantitative side, the survey went out to just over 1,500 students in higher education, 529 members of staff to be exact. And then we also had a chance to do some in-depth interviews with 12 higher education leaders. The countries that are included in this research were six countries: the US, Canada, UK, Ireland, Spain, and Australia. And so we really had a chance to kind of get the perspectives of both, students and staff, but also then higher education leaders across those six countries. It's a range of different institutions that these students and staff come from. When you go into the report, there's a bulky methodology section in which you can kind of see that it really ranges from the small privates to large publics, etc. And all of those students were either enrolled full-time or part-time at their institution, and staff were employed full-time or part-time at their institutions. And so I think what I really took from this report, and something that sort of stood out to me, firstly on the student side, what we've known for some time now is that students really think about future career prospects when they're
Mhm.
selecting an institution. The data here was no different. That came up in the top three again. 44% of students select their institution for career prospects. But only 18% of those students feel very prepared for work. And then it was
Mhm.
slightly higher. I mean, it was 40% for feeling prepared for the AI world. But there still is obviously this disconnect in between, what students are selecting the institution for, what they're leaving with. Also, on the student side, what I thought was interesting was this kind of belonging, connection, and purpose that students have always craved. Um, those numbers were not very high, in terms of
Mhm.
how connected do they feel, how much of that sense of belonging and purpose do they feel. Those numbers were all kind of in around the 20% sort of mark. Um, and that was just on the student side. So I wouldn't say that was surprising, but I would say that it's a learning opportunity almost, right?
Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
we, this comes up time and time again.
Yeah.
So, how can institutions maybe rethink what they're doing to make sure that that bridge is kind of, that gap is filled between what students want from a career perspective, and then also that they're getting the connection, the belonging, and the sense of purpose that they want.
Yeah. I mean, so much of what was in the report than what you're saying. I mean, whether it's thinking of, a student having trying to understand how my sense of belonging at an institution, or trying to understand how am I going to translate whatever I'm doing into a career. There's a lot that kind of comes back to foundational, just knowing of students and understanding of students as a base to be able to deliver a great career outcome or a sense of belonging throughout the experience. And the one thing that I called out in a blog that I wrote about the report was I felt like I was really seeing it's we've often talked about students, wanting kind of an Amazon or Netflix experience or something, but it's that's not quite right. I mean, there's much more than that, right? So just being transactionally efficient is great. But that's kind of baseline. Like,
Mhm.
okay, you got to that point, but now what? Because education isn't or shouldn't be just an Amazon experience of buying a toothbrush.
Yeah.
It's much more. It's a transformational experience. So yes, we need to be transactionally efficient in certain areas, probably in most areas, but while we're being transactionally efficient, we need to deliver that human element to it. And I was seeing that very clearly in the report. I think it said, that students are really looking for that human experience and to be known. uh,
Mm.
what's your reaction to that? Are you seeing institutions kind of maybe graduate, if you will, beyond being efficient to being more empathetic at scale?
Yeah, it's a great observation and question, Jason, because I think I'll say that there are institutions that we are working with at the moment who I feel have graduated, as you put it, because they are looking at these students as sort of whole humans, as we've heard a
Mhm.
lot of leaders talk about it recently, that we cannot ignore that these are not just students at the institution. They are anders in a lot of cases, right? They have something
Yeah.
else going on, right? It's and work and children. I mean, I can attest to all of that. And so I looking at them in that way as whole humans, taking that whole human approach to really understand what are those things that are also going on that could be impacting what they're doing at the institution is so important to then personalize the experience for them, right? No longer is that the large population of students once upon a time, as you know, used to be that traditional student moving from high school to into higher education. That's not the case anymore. So how are we kind of looking at how are we looking at kind of flexibility in a new way and
Mhm.
personalization in a new way to make sure that we're meeting the needs of today's demographic and not the demographic of yesterday. So higher education, there was one of our a university leader that was on the webinar with us just last week unpacking some of their report
Mhm.
findings, said that higher education's never been so nimble and hasn't moved as quickly as other industries have. But if we don't do that in the next kind of 3 to 5 years or sooner, right, we lose the kind of that population of students today, right, that wants more of that, needs that empathetic approach, needs that connection. And so what can we do? What are those strategies that we can quickly put into place, even if they're not the right
Mhm.
strategies, right? Trial and error. What can we do to make sure that we reach those students especially when they need it, right? And I think understanding them is a big part of it.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. I want to get into the Anders in a minute and alumni relations, working with the student side of the house in maybe new ways. But that notion of being able to pivot or being agile that you just mentioned is really, really interesting. I'd love to just hear your point of view on this. I mean, heard, I mean, you and I worked together during COVID, and so we saw institutions out of real necessity having to pivot and try stuff and experiment in new ways and roll out programs really at scale very quickly. It feels like we some of that stuck, but we've maybe regressed a little bit into the old ways, the more comfortable ways of being more deliberate. And sometimes that's good because you don't want to always be, reacting. You want to have more deliberate, thoughtful. But maybe we're in a moment right now where there is a more, not at the COVID level for sure, but more urgency to act and to try things. And I'm curious what you're seeing in terms of, it's one thing for institutions to pilot ideas and try things, but doing so kind of haphazardly doesn't always lead to ideas at scale. So I'm curious what you're seeing about institutions just being maybe more planful, more mindful about piloting ideas with an eye toward, yeah, I'm going to incubate a dozen ideas, and maybe two or three of them are the ones that get to that we scale, but having more of a process around it than there's just a sort of the whack-a-mole situation of lots of things happening at once.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that happen. I agree to some extent that some of it is still reactive, right? Whether it's
Hmm.
on especially on the student side, a lot of what's going on isn't necessarily a proactive approach to making sure students are have a good student experience, not just get through it, but also have a great experience. But of the institutions who have really been a little bit more strategic, what we've seen them do is some really interesting stuff with AI, and you see a lot of this in the report
Mm.
as well. I think what's changed over the years is really AI was something like, oh, it's out there, it's being done by other industries, and it could come into higher education. We could start doing some cool stuff with it. Our students interact with it all the time. Now we're actually seeing really interesting use cases where
Hmm.
institutions have been able to scale with the use of AI. In the report, we asked a question around, generally how were staff feeling about the use of AI in higher education, and 81% of staff said that they were interested in or excited by the future of AI in higher education, and they're seeing the benefits of AI and believe that it can really and truly transform across the student life cycle. And then there's that other group that are actually doing it. They're doing it today, whether it's
Yep.
making it, easier on the front end when, a student reaches out and is just inquiring about an institution, or whether it's engaging, alumni and donors on the other end. There's some really interesting stuff being done. And I think what's different about those institutions and their ability to truly scale are probably three things that we hear from leaders, and we heard loud and clear in these interviews as well. One is having that enthusiastic leadership, or
Hmm.
leadership that's really bought in. We talk about that top-down approach all the time, but I think it's incredibly important now in order for this to be like different, in order to really be
Hmm.
moving the needle and future-proofing the institution. The second one is also that collaboration that we always talk about so much between that leadership and IT, and others on campus as well, like really having that forum for where those pain points can be heard, and then marrying sort of, where AI makes sense, right? Not just for the sake of doing it, but just that
Yes.
particular use case. And then the third thing that we also heard loud and clear was really that test and learn mindset, as we were just talking about. I think it's still
Hmm.
really important, because if we wait for something to be perfect, we might be waiting a really long time. So I think it's
Yes.
really, really, really amazing what we've seen institutions do. Even in recent years, we had some great customer stories shared just at our education summit earlier this year, where they've they've jumped in. Institutions have jumped in. If it doesn't work, that's fine. We'll try again, and we'll iterate, and we'll
Mm.
try and get better. But at least let's jump in. And
Yeah.
they're able to do that because they've had leadership brought in, because they had that collaboration, and they had a strategy before they even went to look at what technology could support.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was there's a client of Attain's I was talking to recently that has some of that happening where the leadership is bought in, and instead of kind of like innovation happening in secret in the corner because nobody wants IT to hear about the thing that they're trying, and so they're off on their own. Instead of that, they're actually incentivizing people. Hey, like try stuff, and we're gonna kind of like Shark Tank, have you show us what you're doing, and then we'll highlight junior staff members who are doing really cool things, and then we will have a process around these things. So it's really like embracing some chaos and innovation in the corners, but bringing it to the leadership level, and really empowering folks who are not at the leadership level, who maybe are earlier in their careers, but who have really interesting ideas to come forward. And I think that's a pretty awesome model, and a great example to see how where it once was, yeah, you're kind of like hoping IT doesn't find out about the thing you're doing and then aside. Instead, like actually, we want to create a
Yeah.
trusted, open, collaborative environment that really says, "Hey, if you have a cool idea, like let's see what happens. Let's try it out." And it does open conversations, Navneet, around like values. And I think like what are the values of the institution, and how do we treat employees and the students and everybody? And I'm curious what you're hearing. I mean, I use AI every single day or as kind of my personal assistant to help me do things that I don't feel like doing, or that are just really time consuming. And I'm very happy with this, and as my kind of personal assistant. Um, in the higher ed context, and in many contexts, but talking about the higher ed context, you know, the values that we have around AI are super important as we're trying to deliver meaningful, impactful experiences and sometimes very sensitive conversations with students. What are you hearing from Salesforce customers and in the report around how values are kind of guiding AI decisions?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I mean, firstly, in the report, what we found is that AI doesn't work everywhere, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the question was asked to students and staff where they think that there is potential or they're using it today. Things like mental health support and well-being were not on that list. That actually, that's where services have improved over time, but that's maybe not a good fit for
Mm-hmm.
AI. Even if it's an AI assistant, it's not a good fit because they want
Yeah.
more of that human touch, right? And so I think really listening to where students feel like it makes sense, where staff feel like they're trained to have that guide on the side, let's do it. But if not, there was so there are some data points in the report that are also saying staff want more training and reskilling and upskilling to make sure that they know what they're doing around AI as well, so that they can better support students and also just be on top of things themselves, right? So I think, you know, there is an opportunity to sort of where there might be gaps now where AI doesn't make sense, or say if it's sort of even this sort of third wave of AI around agents, if they don't make sense or they're not kind of known what will they do, then that's okay. It's about kind of figuring out, you know, is there potential for those later so that staff can get back to that sort of higher value work, right? And do what they came to higher education to do, which is not the admin stuff in a lot of case, right? They,
Yes.
but it's
Yes.
kind of how do we get back to that those meaningful interactions with students? How do we really get back to what staff call that higher value work? And it feels like AI
Yes.
can do that, but where it makes sense and where the right training is and where kind of student voice is being listened to, where they kind of,
Yes.
you know?
I love that. And there's so much of, do you remember, oh, God, I think it was like 2021 or two, during one of the education summits that we did virtually, I did a brief like intro and then a Q&A with Brian Stevenson. I don't know if you remember
Yeah,
Brian
yeah,
Stevenson. So he always uses this term that has just stuck in my brain since that time, called get proximate. He always says he wants to get proximate with like the wrongfully incarcerated individuals. That phrase sticks with me a lot, and I hear that a lot in what you're saying of like that careful listening and getting proximate with staff and learners, and truly not just hearing their needs, but truly like feeling and understanding their needs as we're creating these experiences. I think that's
yeah,
super powerful, and often kind of can be often like overlooked in process of like, or we have to always check our biases and assumptions that we think we know the learners because we asked them a year or two ago on a survey we did, but we have to
yeah.
always be building that muscle and working at getting proximate with their needs.
Absolutely. And I think assumptions are a recipe for disaster in any aspect of life for people. My husband will put it even differently. But, you know, and I think it's what you said, like constantly, like always be listening, right? Always kind of being on and making sure that just because we did this thing 20 years ago, that doesn't mean it's going to work now, right? Even though it
Yeah,
was successful then. So, like you said, like building that muscle to really align with today's needs for staff and students is really important. That's why we you know we do even do this research, or like student surveys and things are carried out so we can better understand what is it that they need and want today.
yeah,
And so, and then a lot of that then uh, for us on the technology side, it's easier then to support an institution with that technology, if it's kind of better understood, like what is the need today, what is the institutional value, what are the institutional values and things like that, rather than, oh, here's a product, and
Yeah, yeah.
and you don't want to do that in any aspect of your life. You don't want to use something for the sake of using it. You want to use something because it's getting you some positive outcome, right? Or some good end result. And I think the same applies to higher education.
Yeah, I love that. We've got to wrap it up in a couple minutes here, but I want to maybe end here our time together today. Earlier, you mentioned the Anders, and I am at this point, I think, obsessively thinking about alumni relations and advancement and how institutions can create more connective tissue between the traditional student experience and that office of alumni relations of advancement, particularly as Anders or folks like you and me who are in our careers, but likely need to upskill as well, could value some more connectivity with from institutions that we work with. Um, what are you seeing? I know I've talked with some folks in advancement recently who more or less are saying the same things that maybe they've said a few years back, that the information they're getting from graduated students are, they get their phone number and email address and what they graduated in, but not what their hopes and dreams are, or like any of the maybe interesting information that would have been collected in the student journey that could actually help them think about not just how am I going to raise money from the student, how the student can help me in the institution, but the other way around, how the institution can continue to help the student over the course of their career. Are
Mhm.
you seeing any movement in the advancement space to say, wait a minute, like fundraising isn't just about asking for the funds, but we now really, especially now, need to be first thinking about how do we deliver value for the alumni, and that might be in the form of lifelong learning.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. I think my mind straight away goes back to something we asked in the report around just unified data, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think in order for the advancement office to do what they do even better, they need that view of current students, right? And sort of not just, as you said, it's not just about what can we get from them later on. It's about what were their needs, their interests, their aspirations, and everything while they were at the institution, so that then obviously they can better reach them and better connect with them later. The other reason why I think there is maybe more opportunity for those offices to better connect, whether it's through a single view of data or just, just from just a relationship perspective, it should be better, is because there's a strong connection, as we saw in the report, between those institutions that reported having a great experience and those that are going to promote the university later
Mm-hmm.
on. If you're not having a great experience, you are not going to be a promoter of that university or that college. And so it's almost as if it's a no-brainer that there needs to be more of this sort of connection between these offices and these different departments on campus, and so that they can really understand, that careers are important, that, these things outside of their higher education are also important, and that's what makes them. And so just doing more of that, having more of that relationship and doing more of that, I think is super important. I'll also just say as well, I have to credit a university president that really has focused on that concept of Anders over the years, right? Because I think that was what the big part of it, having that empathetic approach, making the connection to the alumni office, making sure that there is this kind of single view, so that, when we look at when it goes full circle, that, if one thing goes right, so if the experience goes right, then obviously they're more likely to be engaged later.
Mm-hmm.
It's like super important. And so I think there's just so much that can be taken from this report with regards to kind of ways in which to do that.
Yeah, and I love having data, really thinking about data as the foundation for all of that, as shared data across the life cycle, and really thinking about that student life cycle as a life cycle, as a circle, not a linear journey.
Yeah.
And having leadership bought in on that and evangelizing that to all staff, so we all think about it that way, and that changes our values, it changes how we think about data, how we think about our interactions with one another. So, Navneet, I'm very sad we have to go. But this has been really fun. It's so awesome to talk with you. We should do this more. And the report is fantastic. Congratulations on a great report. For everyone listening to us and watching us, you can download the Salesforce Connected Education Report. You can check out my blog that I wrote on it. Happy to connect with you today, Navneet. Thanks to everyone for taking the time to connect with us, and hope to see you again sometime soon. Take care. Bye. Thanks, Navneet.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, everyone.